Welcome back to the Foundation in C# course. We are currently in Module 1, and this lesson is going to be an overview of Visual Studio. Remember from your homework that you needed to install Visual Studio before we got to this step. So if you haven't done that yet, go back and finish it up first. Now before we get started, I want to prepare you for a couple things. First, I'm using Visual Studio 2017 Enterprise Edition. That's different from your Community Edition. Fortunately, that should not pose any problems for us, since what you see me do on my screen should be exactly what you do and how you do it on your screen. There's only a couple of edge cases where I'll have a couple of features that you do not have, but they're minor and not until near the end of this course. You'll be able to do everything you need to do with Community Edition. Second, I want to point out right up front that learning C# is not something you should try to do passively. Don't just watch the videos and think you'll pick it up. A lot of times people watch what I do and think, well, that makes sense. But later, when they try to do it themselves, they can't remember how to do it, and it becomes frustrating. Save yourself the frustration and do these activities alongside me. Pause the video if you have to. I have found that watching how to do something and then immediately doing it makes the knowledge stick much better. Okay, so let's jump right into Visual Studio. This is the Visual Studio IDE right here. Now, an IDE is an interactive development environment. Just know that IDE means program. So, here we have Visual Studio. A couple things to note. First of all, I'm using the dark theme. That's why it's all dark. I personally find that for my personal development, it works a whole lot better on my eyes if it's in the dark theme. I also find that it seems to show up better with the contrast on my videos if I continue with that dark theme. Now, if I teach in a classroom, I actually switch to the light theme because on a projector, the light theme seems to work better. And it's all about how that white interacts. On a projector, it's just nothing's displaying there. Whereas on a monitor, that white is glaring out at you. So when you first set up Visual Studio, it probably asked you, which theme do you want? And you may have had no clue and just picked one at random, which is fine. I'm going to show you how to change it and try out different themes. If you go to Tools menu, and go all the way to the bottom to Options. This is where you configure Visual Studio. There's a lot of things in here you could do. Notice the long list we have here. But let's stick with the basics for now. In the very first option under Environment General is the color theme. I have selected dark. There's light, there's blue with extra contrast, and blue in general. Try out different ones. You have to select it and then hit OK, and it will re-render Visual Studio in that color. So for example, I could try the blue theme. I hit OK and wait for it, and my Visual until then, some menus might be a little cramped, and that's okay. We can usually find a workaround or make the menus bigger or something like that. But my fonts are bigger, and again, if you want to do that, you can go to Tools, Options, and come down here to Fonts and Colors. So here you select and change all the different fonts for all the different places in the application. Now, the one issue I have here is that's a lot of options. And these are different locations you could change the font size, which and here's Microsoft's balance they usually get wrong, but it's okay. They try and give you all the different options so you can be as granular as you want. The problem is that sometimes you just want the basic make everything bigger. And there are plugins for that. I'm not going to cover them, but there are plugins you can look for to make all the fonts bigger or all the relevant fonts bigger. So those are the two that I'd recommend at least looking at to see if you want to tweak anything. First is under General, that color theme, if you want to change that. And then under Fonts, if you want to make a change there. The system default for fonts is pretty small. It's up to you. But especially if you're on a large monitor or a high DPI monitor, that can be a little bit daunting on tired eyes. So that's the first place to make a couple of tweaks and adjustments to Visual Studio. Now, the other thing I want to show you is just how many different options are available to you in Visual Studio. I'm not going to cover them all, but I want to just kind of show you how generally Visual Studio works with its options. First, we have up at the top our menu bar, our toolbar up here. And this is a whole bunch of icons that are relevant for where we are. This will change depending on what we need to do. So if we're inside of code, we'll have other options here like run that code. So that's one place we'll see some options. If you want to add something here that you know is available or you think is available, you can go to the view menu and go to toolbars and look for the toolbar of your choice, what you want to do, and just add it. Or you can customize your toolbar. Typically, I find you don't need to do that very often, if at all. But that is available to you. So there's a bunch of toolbars here that you can do. Plus, there's a whole bunch more options you can add as well. There's a whole list of commands in here. There's also our menu, which of course you're familiar with the menu. And it's pretty standard, but just make sure you remember Tools options for changing the overall Visual Studio settings. And then also we'll look at this in just a minute, extensions and updates. Oh, and there's also this. I believe this is built into Visual Studio now. But this is to change the overall font size for the editor and overall font size for the environment. This is one of those newer features that Visual Studio added. I used to have a plugin to do this, like I said, but that I believe is now baked right into Visual Studio. So check that out as well. There's either just click on it, or you can use the Shift up arrow, Shift down arrow, or Control up arrow and Control down arrow. So those are the important ones, tools options, and then extensions and updates we're going to cover in just a minute. The other thing to point out is there's a whole bunch of flyout menus. Notice over here on the right, we have Solution Explorer, Team Explorer, Notifications. If I were to click on one of these, it actually brings a menu out. Now, there's nothing in here now because we don't have a solution open. But if I click anywhere else, that will go away. But if I click it again, notice in the upper right-hand corner, there's this pin that right now says Auto Hide. If I click that pin, it will actually pin it to my Always Open setting. So now, if it no longer auto hides, if I click over here, click somewhere else, it doesn't go away. But notice the other options, the Team Explorer notifications, are down here. Now, if I click on Team Explorer, it opens Team Explorer here, and the same with notifications. And they stay open as well. So this whole area now stays open. If I unpin it, they all go back over. The same thing over here with Toolbox, Task Explorer. If I pin these, now I have this menu down below, and I can unpin it and it hides away. Same at the bottom. We have Error List, Task List, and all the rest. If I click on one and pin it, it comes up, and now I can tab between them, and they open up in this same space. Now, obviously, if I start going crazy and pinning things, my area to actually work gets smaller and smaller. And in fact, I can resize these using the guide in the middle. So I can drag this over, I can drag this one over, and I can drag this one up. And there's my workspace right now, is right in that little spot. Obviously, this is a stupid example, but I just kind of want to show you how this works so that you can be comfortable saying, you know what, I want to go ahead and unpin these things and not feel like you're going to lose them. They're not going to go away. Often in my development work, if I'm working on something, for example, Windows Forms. Windows Forms makes heavy use of a drag and drop toolbox. So I will pin that open and then work on my form. But then when I'm done or I go to code, I'll unpin that again so I can get that space back. So that's just something you can do depending on how you feel comfortable. But just know that you can hide them or you can show them and you can pin them to keep them open longer term. Now, if you close any of them, it's not a problem. So for example, Solution Explorer, I could close that. Notice the tab is now gone. How do I get it back? Well, View, the View menu, here's my standard ones. So you'll see the toolbox down here, the task list, the error list, and all the rest. But right up here at the top, Solution Explorer. I click on that, and now it's back. The other thing people find out, usually accidentally, is that you can drag and drop these windows. Now notice when I'm dragging, I'm kind of holding it right now. I haven't let go of the left mouse button. I have some visual indicators. So there's an indicator up here. There's this one in the center. There's ones on the edges and the bottom. And these indicators tell me where I can place this window. They can be a bit confusing. But for example, if I were to mouse over this top one and let go, now my Solution Explorer will open at the top. If I unpin it, it hides, but notice there's Solution Explorers right there. I can click it and it'll come back, and then if I click out, it goes away. So I could put this in a different spot, or if I want to, I could put it over here on the right. And now notice, let's make this a little smaller. Notice it's not in the same area as the toolbar. So if I were to, it's pinned right now. If I were to open Toolbox, it opens over the Solution Explorer. But if I pin Toolbox, it moves Solution Explorer over. And now I have two things pinned on the left. So the reason I show you this is just to show you that there's different things you can do that make life a little easier, or menus here, different options. So with that being said, the view menu is very important for showing them. So we have the different flyout menus and how we can pin them, unpin them, drag them around, rearrange our page the way that makes sense. Personally, for me, I try and keep them unpinned whenever possible, unless it really makes sense to have one pinned. Okay, so far we've covered tweaking Visual Studio a little bit, covered a couple of little menus, and then also these flyout areas. The next thing I want to cover is updating Visual Studio, because updating Visual Studio is important. Now notice up in the upper right hand corner, I have this yellow square with a flag in it. This says I have notifications. These notifications include Visual Studio 2017 update for version 15.6.3. So when I started Visual Studio, it went out and said, you know what? You actually have an update. Let's go ahead and alert you of that. And that is the notification tab, same area as Solution Explorer. Like I showed you, Solution Explorer notifications is one of those tabs. So you could click there and it will take you to this dialog here, the extensions and updates. Or if you don't have this dialog, you can also go to Tools, Extensions and Updates, the second one down. And what extensions and updates are modifications to Visual Studio itself. And so this is where you can get add-ins for Visual Studio to make it better, more powerful, and customized for how you want to work. So this right here is the installed add-ins that I have. So there's a list here. And actually a lot of this stuff comes from Microsoft. For example, this font sizer, that's actually an extension. I guess I was wrong. So that when I said tool, increase or decrease the font, that's actually an extension from either what Microsoft has said, maybe not everybody wants, but here's some good things it can do, or what a third party person, including just a single developer, has said, you know what, I can make this little bit of Visual Studio better. And so they've included a usually free add-in in the Microsoft Visual Studio Marketplace, and you can go and grab that. So there's controls, templates, and tools. But the one I want to point out right now is under updates. And this is where you're going to see updates for both the product itself, Visual Studio, as well as the marketplace extensions that you have installed. So, and again, this is where that font size kind of crops up a little bit. I can't see the full Visual Studio Marketplace without scrolling over, but it has a 1 next to it saying it's one extension that needs to be updated. And it tells you the version number, and there's more information. Under Product Update, there's the Visual Studio 2017 Update version 15.6.3, and here is the release notes. If I click on this, it's going to open up a web page. Let's bring us down here. Here's all the things that have changed in Visual Studio. This is 15.6.3. Here's the change. You can read a bunch of stuff in here. So read over what it does, and there's even helpful links in here. For example, we've added new shortcut for edit.duplicate in the keyboard mappings. You can click on that. There's snapshot debugging. That's a cool little feature for ASP.NET applications. Click on that and you can learn more. So I click on that and it tells me here's how this works. If I go back, I can learn about other things that are happening. The Task Explorer has some changes. And in the release. And they'll explain this is what's happening in this release. And so you might read through that and go, I've been wanting to do that. Well, they'll explain in more depth how to do it. And you'll have a better idea of how to use those things now. Because if you don't read these release notes, you're going to miss it. And if you miss it, you may go months or even years without knowing that Visual Studio can do something that would benefit you. So definitely, at least you can pause your installation and resume at a later time. That's kind of neat. I'm not going to read through all these, but some of the stuff you just go, yep, that's kind of neat. But some of the stuff kind of jumps out and goes, yes, I need to use that. So just make sure you read through the release notes and grow in your knowledge of what Visual Studio can do for you. Okay, so we're going to do an update right now because we have one. I've actually been saving it for you. So I want to get this update done now so you can see kind of how the update process works. Now again, they're going to change this update process probably at some point. It may look a little different, but the main core, how it works, will be the same. So let's go ahead and hit the update button. And I get the message saying, hey, you need to give me permission to do this. Now I need to close this out. And I'll show you why as I drag over the updater. Here's the Visual Studio installer. It needs to make sure Visual Studio is fully closed before it starts updating Visual Studio. Kind of makes sense. So now the installation is going to get started. So now it's downloading, and notice that it's downloading at, well, it's downloading pretty fast, but we got 1 gigabyte to download. That's significant. So just know if you're on a slow network, or if you're flying on a plane somewhere and you're on the plane's Wi-Fi, probably not the time to do an update. Now again, you can pause. That's one of those new features. You can pause, but I recommend that you wait until you have a good amount of bandwidth and a good amount of time before you kick this off. So this installer is going to run. It's going to download. And notice, even while it's downloading, it's already installing some of my packages. So that's kind of a nice feature, is it's not waiting until the whole thing is downloaded before it starts the installation. It starts that sooner so it can be done sooner. Now I'll pause the video here and I'll let it do its thing. Then we'll come back near the end and we'll talk through anything else that's happening or has happened. All right, we're back and we're almost wrapped up with the installation. Nothing of real importance happened other than those numbers changed. So it's just kind of waiting for it to be done. It took about probably 7 or 8 minutes to fully complete or get to this point. So that's not too bad for an installation that took, about a gigabyte to download. So we're just kind of wrapping up. It's going to get Visual Studio ready. And as soon as it's done, it's going to say, okay, you can go ahead and launch Visual Studio. So the installer process isn't hard. It's just one of those things you set it going, you walk away, get a coffee, get lunch, whatever, and then come back and it should be ready to go. And there's a whole lot of information here, including if you break something, you can either repair or uninstall Visual Studio. But right now, again, you can read those release notes, or you can hit the launch button, which is what I'll do. And I'll close this out. We're going to start up Visual Studio again. And now we're at the new version 15.6.3. If you go to the Help menu, go to About, we'll see that we are at 15.6.3. So now my notifications say I have no new notifications. So that's good. Sign in as me. The reason this sign in is important is for a couple reasons. First of all, Enterprise Edition needs a license. And so by signing in, I apply my license to it. It used to be that Community Edition needed that same license, but it was free. I'm not sure if that's still the case. I don't believe you have to sign in with Community Edition anymore. But it is a good idea to sign in. It's just a Microsoft account, which doesn't mean a Microsoft.com or Outlook.com account. As you can see here, I have an IamTimCorey.com account, which is actually a Gmail account. And so it's just you register your email address, whatever it is, and then create a password with Microsoft saying this is now a Microsoft account as well. It just gives them your email address and your password so that you can log in. And the reason why I do this is because if I start up Visual Studio somewhere else, when I log in as me, it's going to set the theme to the dark theme. It's going to change my font sizes to the way I want them. It's going to change some other things as well. And so all these things happen because I have logged in as me. It personalizes my account. It remembers those settings across all the different platforms that I use and makes sure they all stay in sync with some of the basics, at least, the themes and all the rest. So that's kind of important, at least for me, because I do log in on other machines. I have a laptop. I also, when I teach at the local college, I log in there and it sets everything up for me. And so that's kind of nice. So that might be something to consider, is logging in. Again, upper right-hand corner, you click the drop down and say account settings. You can sign out. You can manage your profile, and you can do other things as well. So that's kind of it for Visual Studio. Now, I do want to cover what your homework is for this lesson. Guess what? It's not hard. Your homework, just go ahead and complete the next lesson. Really not hard. There's not much you can do here. If you want to poke around in Visual Studio, that'd be great. But we're definitely going to get started into more Visual Studio in the next lesson, where we're going to talk about actually building a C# application.